All right, we're gonna do a little point of view vase. I'm gonna make a jewel tone and white vase. I'll talk a little bit while I'm doing it, answer some frequently asked questions I get. So inside the furnace there, we're about halfway through our tank. I'll recharge it here after this piece probably. I'm gonna get a little more glass. With the little mini dragons, you don't get the cleanest melts, but this is only 3 hours into the day, so pretty good really for such a short melt time. So add a couple layers of white glass. I like the smaller frit. It tends to melt much quicker. So for frit work, it allows for a much faster color application, which is nice. Really though, only for black and white. For any other color I use, I typically go with like a size 3 frit. It's just denser color. It's a nice balance between speed of melting and density of color. I used to use size 2 a lot, but I found that it really wasn't that much more dense than size 1 and took significantly longer to melt in, and so I was spending more time melting my color in the end than I otherwise needed to. Now with the jewel tone mix, I typically only have 1 coat of color. Sometimes I'll do 2 or 1.5 coats. There's so many different shades on. There's 7 different colors in here. I'll do 1.5 coats. So many different colors that if you do 2 full coats, you can start to muddy things up pretty quick. Especially if you start putting in color patterns like a Marver twist or tweezer twist or anything like that. I'll do a very slight friction twist on this one. I just want a little movement in the color, but not extreme. So I usually start that off when there's still some texture in the color. And then just a little bit of friction by turning in place to get just a little movement. I don't even nip the tips on these like I would with an optic twist, because I don't want crazy movement. I just want a little bit. All right, I will often go from that shape straight into a starter bubble just to save some time. You know, I am saving the time not on the starter bubble section, but really on the cooling before the second gather part. I may have been a little too slow. That second I stopped to explain why I was doing the starter bubble before a reheat might have been enough to cool the glass off. There we go. I just held pressure when I put it back in the furnace to get some movement out of it. I actually like to have a slightly thicker tip on my starter bubbles on these vases anyway. I move a lot of my material down and then blow into it. So by having a slightly thicker tip, it allows me to move more of that color. All right, so this is a shape I like to start with for a vase. I'm gonna let it cool way down, and then I'll go back into the furnace and get more glass. While that's happening, I'm gonna arrange my tools. I was teaching a class earlier, so I remove most of my tools from the bench when I do that. Folks, if you have any questions about the glass blowing, let me know. We're making a short video for our different social media, but please let me know if you have questions. I'll be happy to answer them. All right. All right. All right, I'm gonna go back in the furnace now, gather up a second gather of glass. It's really windy here today, which is gonna cause me some issues. We already lost a piece today because a breeze came through at really the absolute worst time and cracked the glass. So we're gonna try not to let that happen again. Normally I would use paper or a block after this second gather, but I have neglected to refill my water bucket, and so I am using the marver. It's not ideal. It's a little slower, a little less elegant of a solution, but it works. So, I'm gonna go back into the furnace. I'm gonna let that heat sink into the glass. And then I can start to shape this up. I am going to cool that tip down some more. I like to keep as much thickness on the bottom on these vases as possible in the beginning so that I can inflate the bottoms without having to reheat things in just a moment. So first I'll inflate. Okay, give it a little stretch. Let gravity do the work. Good. All right, now I'm going to squeeze down a jack line, or at least the start of a jack line. I do a lot more stretching than this, so just a simple start to define it. It gets a little off center sometimes, but that's a really easy fix because I got to inflate this so much more. I can just push that bottom up on center, and then by the time I stretch everything out and inflate, it's totally on center, and there's no evidence that it ever was not on center. So on this heat, I'm going to inflate the whole thing a bit more, tighten that jack line down a little bit, and then stretch it. That is, of course, after cooling that tip down ever so slightly. Inflate the whole thing a little more. Tighten the jack line. And don't have quite enough heat to stretch it yet. I could force it, but that's not necessary. Heat is your friend. Reheat the glass. Make it hotter. All right, so let's give this a swing to stretch it out. Inflate it a bit more. And now here comes that thickness on the bottom being useful. By blowing it up into the air, a couple different things are happening. Aside from making some of you chuckle, what it really is doing is allowing the sides of the bubble to collapse and move outwards, and inflating the whole thing without actually extending the bottom too much. If you do that same move but have it pointing down, you get a longer shape with less bulbous effect there. As you see, that tip pushed out just a hair without changing the shapes of the sides much. So it is time to add a foot to this vase. I like to add feet for a few different reasons. They add thickness, they add stability, they preserve this nice curve. I could preserve that curve by just flattening the very tip, but then you get a piece that, you know, you can't put much strain on. You can't put a big bouquet of flowers in because it's got a very small point of balance. So doing it this way allows for a functional piece. It also kind of creates a pedestal to put the piece up and on display. So I'm going to hang that right there. It's going to swing a little bit, but it's not going to go anywhere. Scoop up some more glass. Obviously, that's not enough. It's a little tricky in this furnace to get enough on a single gather for a nice big foot. So cooking my fingers a little bit here. There we are. Well, that's interesting. Because my furnace is slightly at an angle here, that whole thing started to move. That one, it just slid right off the end of the table. That's okay. We'll make it work after all. That's a new one. I've never had to do that before. I've had pieces fall on the ground before, but never had the foot of a piece fall on the ground before I got to attach it. That's right. So, thankfully, the advantage of working on dirt and grass is that it's soft. Now that foot's never gonna be perfectly round after that. So what we'll do, instead of fighting with it, is I'll use my tweezers and I will create some movement in the foot that will hide that imperfection and just give a little bit of character, a little bit of shape to the foot. Creating a little divot on the bottom to help it sit flat. Stretching that out just a bit to show off that curve some more. And now we're going to transfer this off of the pipe and work on the other end. For that I need to make the punty. So typically I don't hang the pipe up for a punty, I'll just make it with one hand. When you've made thousands of these, it's really not tricky to do a single hand gather and make a punty with one hand. So, set that right there. Grab my tweezers, cool it down just a hair, fuse it together. I like to use just a drop of water on the jack lines. Now this jack line looks a little thick, a little wide, but that's actually intentional. When I'm making a piece like this, I don't typically do real small jack lines because I like to keep the extra thickness and create some asymmetry with a sort of sloppy jack line, because I use that asymmetry for the final shape. And it just saves me a step from having to cut in an asymmetric top if it breaks off asymmetrically. So, gonna heat the top section of this up, get it really moving, stretch this open a little bit, flaring it, and then we will go into a final step and sling the top of this. Now, we're here at the Brevard County Renaissance Fair, making one of our videos for you folks. There are oftentimes crowds watching. If you hear me talking to someone off cameras, because I'm usually answering a question. Are you folks enjoying your day at the festival today? Good, I'm glad to hear that. Oh, thank thee, we try. It's my job to make it look easy. Shh, no one saw that. It's not like it was recorded for So, the top of that's really good and hot. I'm gonna stretch that open. Now, I could stretch that and flare that open a little more, then take time to clean up these sides where it's a little lumpy. But again, I like asymmetry. So what I'm gonna do is I am gonna flare that more, but I'm not gonna worry about the sides too much. After it gets flared, I'll heat the whole neck up and use gravity and centripetal force to stretch that, cleaning out the sides, making them look a lot more elegant, but also adding a bit of asymmetry and a ruffle to the top edge. These are our sling top style vases. I have a lot of fun making them. No two turn out exactly the same. They're a little tricky to make in a furnace this size because you have to be really careful not to get things too wide or too hot or too long before you begin. So again, I could stop right there, and that's a very handsome vase. It's got good proportions, but because I had the intention of making everything asymmetrical, the top's not perfectly round because of that weird jack line earlier, and so we're gonna sling this as was the original plan. Open that up as wide as it'll let me. And this should happen relatively quickly. Gonna get the whole thing hot. Slowing my turning down. In a second, I'm gonna get the neck an extra kiss of heat to facilitate the sling. All right, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, a little faster than I thought. There we go, folks. That's how we make our sling top vase. You like it? All right. Pardon this. We're shooting a little video for our social media. Little fairy box on my head. So I'm going to remove this from the stick, put it away to cool it down. I've got to be relatively quick with this because I can't flash the piece after a sling. It gets too long to go back into the furnace. So, you know, tap and it pops off. I'm gonna warm my glove up a little bit after I throw it on the ground, because a dirty glove is a good glove apparently. All right. Warm that up to not shock the piece, and into the oven to cool off. It's too tall actually to stand up in the oven. That's fine. All right, that's how we make a vase. Thanks guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you watch again.